Welcome into another edition of Inside Carolina's Noon Dish. I'm Tommy Ashley. That's Don Callahan. We are sponsored by Johnny T-Shirt, JohnnyT-Shirt.com, and Congruity. Don Callahan, what's going on, my man? I'm gonna say it straight out the gate. You are a new father, and your hair's gone from black to gray in 3 weeks.
I think I've always been fairly gray. Maybe it's just growing a little bit, but I appreciate that. I'll take it as a compliment.
And it means you're working. It means you're not leaving all the work to the lady of the house.
Well, I'll tell you, I got to give her some props because for those who have been on Inside Carolina this past weekend, right, last few days, they know, and we'll get into this a little bit more in detail. But UNC had an official visit weekend that I obviously had to catch up with. Caught up with all 4 official visitors. We'll get into that later, and then also they put those recruits are leaving on Sunday, and then UNC puts their first camp of the season on Sunday also. So I was busy, woke up working and worked all the way until 9:00 at night on Sunday. And I mean, it is what it is. It's my job or whatever. But fortunately, my wife understands that. And I said to her, I was like, look, is there any way I can go sleep up in the man tower on Saturday night? Because even when she gets the baby, I'm still, when the baby wakes up, you're still waking up. I'm still waking up, even though I'm not doing anything. And she allowed me to do that. And so I was very fortunate of that. And then even last night, she actually wanted to stay up a little bit later, and her and the baby slept in the living room, which, I wasn't arguing with that because it was nice to get some uninterrupted sleep. So shout out to Katie. She's the true, we have a chat MVP that Tommy doesn't want me to give out, but Katie.
It's the chat MVP is Katie, period.
Yeah, we'll do that.
Well, we went to the beach late last week, got home, went to the baseball game Saturday night, came to the baseball game Sunday, and I could not believe how many kids were on that field.
The practice field.
Yeah. I mean, so how many, I know we're not talking about the camp.
Yeah.
You've told me we can't talk about the camp.
No, we could talk about the camp. If anyone has any questions about the camp, let's talk about it. I feel like most people are more curious about the official visit stuff, but go ahead.
Yeah, you're right. But let me ask you a question. How many players were involved in that camp on Sunday? Because there was a pile of folks.
Yeah, so we're talking probably like 500. I can actually get the actual numbers, but I'm thinking like 500-ish. I know it was sold out. And then they usually do not, send kids away if they come up and try to walk up and register. So a lot of kids. It actually, it's tough to actually see somebody. I have my list of guys that I try to see, and it's tough because when you finally find a guy that you've been looking for all day long, and he's usually in the back of the line by that point, and then you see one rep, and if you want to see a second, you got to wait like 15 minutes. So these camps aren't great for me. For UNC, it works for their purposes because they make sure they have cameras out there and all that, and they can review everything. So if and obviously they're focusing only on Chip Lindsey's only focusing on the quarterbacks, and he's able to kind of make sure his group has certain guys in it so he can pay attention to those guys. But and then they also, just in case he misses anything, they have videographers out there videoing everything. But it's tough. And so I haven't had this question yet, but I usually get it at some point. Someone will say, oh, hey, my friend's son was at the camp, what you think? And I mean, unless they were somebody who really stood out or were on my list, my initial list of guys to watch, I probably didn't get an opportunity to really. I probably wouldn't know who they were, to be honest. It's not like the prior when UNC used to have like 15 camps and they were 100 kids, sort of thing.
It was so many people out there, and that was a hectic day on campus in Chapel Hill. And then the baseball game last night was unbelievable. If you're a baseball fan, Donnie, you need to be at Carolina at Bosch this coming weekend. The Bosch was on fire last night. Just an amazing atmosphere in Chapel Hill all the way around.
The end of the game last night.
I can't believe they won that one. I mean, to be honest, I can't believe they won. But they're scrappy. If the other team could close out, if the team with the practice field behind Bosch could close out games like that, It would change a lot. But anyway, let's talk a little bit. Do you want to say your chat MVP, or are we going to leave it at Katie?
I mean, I don't want to hurt your feelings.
You don't hurt my dude. I'm grown. I'm grown. I'm 50 something.
So I think we have to give it to an old friend of Tommy's, Ross Martin.
We had a visitor last week that was heavy in the chat.
In typical Ross fashion, he,
I guess it was 2 weeks ago because we had Alex Mars last week.
Yeah,
we recorded that.
Yeah, so this was because actually it was maybe even longer than that because we did we recorded Pat Sudis's interview beforehand but ran it, but we couldn't do that with Alex Mars, which I thought was a great interview with Alex Mars. I know he's not like a well-known person, but as far as like just his integral role, it's kind of interesting on what he does and what he's responsible for. But yeah, so Ross Martin, Chat MVP from a few weeks ago. And our new top 5, you want me to describe it?
Go ahead.
All right. So top 5, I guess, recruits you want North Carolina to land this month. As we've been talking about for a few weeks, June is the month with the official visits. We'll get into this past weekend. We'll preview next weekend during this podcast. But, all 4 weekends of June, UNC is hosting official visitors. They'll have some visits maybe during the week. And all of these visits are heavily influencing 2025 recruits' decisions. And so a lot of decisions are going to be made this month. So who are your 5 recruits you want North Carolina to land? Let's keep it realistic. Let's keep it the guys who are actually officially visiting North Carolina. Tommy and I think we'll do similar, but the way we'll phrase it for us is just importance. The 5 recruits that are important for North Carolina to land.
I agree with that. So top 5 recruits you want Carolina to get. We've done that before in the sort of I don't know if you call it a wish list, but maybe it is a wish list. So top 5 wish list. Yeah. So we're going to start off though. We're going to talk about this past weekend, official visit weekend. As we've sort of led up all through these shows, the month of June is ridiculous as far as official visits for everywhere, usually, but Carolina especially. And we had Alex White several weeks ago. We had Patrick Sudis a couple weeks ago, and then we had Alex Mars this past week talking about all the mechanisms that go into official visits, camps, everything Carolina football recruiting-wise. It is not just one person writing on a chalkboard guys they want and then making phone calls. It is a massive operation at North Carolina to get recruits. So, Don, you've dropped – this is where I'll hesitate because I don't want to spoil your scoop on the Tar Pit Premium message board, but I also don't want to be that person that says, we'll be right back. And then you come back and you're like, subscribe to get this information. So I'll let you start.
We'll talk a little bit. Do you need to go to a break or do you want me to?
No, we'll go ahead and do this, then we'll break, and then we'll talk about this coming weekend, and then we'll hit the top 5. We'll get out of here. It'll be an hour before you know it.
All right, so let's just kind of set the stage here. 4 official visitors. 1 was a commit. That's Devin Ancrum. We won't get into him because obviously he's committed, and there's no signs of him wavering whatsoever. This official visit just kind of solidified things for him, and that's to be expected. The 3 other guys were Jasper Parker, who was somewhat of a late addition to the weekend. And this is why it's important to make sure that you are on the Tar Pit Premium message board, because we broke the news that he was coming this past weekend. I think it was Thursday. He wasn't on anybody's list prior to that. And so he's a running back from Louisiana that North Carolina didn't offer prior to the visit, but did offer during the official visit. And then we also have Christian Evans, who we've talked about a bunch, of defensive tackle from Northern Virginia. North Carolina is one of his 4 or 5 schools that he's really looking at. A lot of people believe North Carolina is kind of the leader. So obviously this past weekend was important. A lot of people thought maybe he might commit this past weekend. He hasn't or didn't. And then the last guy is Herbert Scroggins, who goes by third because he's Herbert Scroggins the third. And I guess it's easier for their family to kind of track all the Herberts by calling him the third or calling him third. And so and to be honest, with the trio of uncommitted guys, it would not shock me if UNC went 3 for 3 with those three. And to be honest,
that impressive a weekend, you say?
yeah, because the thing was, obviously things were going well with Christian Evans anyway, so the official visit is not going to hurt that at all. But obviously North Carolina didn't close the deal yet with him. And then with Jasper Parker, said all the right things. He was very, very vanilla with just his thoughts on North Carolina, or his laying out just where he's at, who's his favorites and all that. He didn't go out and say, something crazy like North Carolina was his leader or anything like along those lines. Evans had more telling, I think, feedback from his official visit. So definitely check out. We'll have a story with him this week. He's the only guy I haven't ran a story on yet. But the Scoop official visit weekend report that I posted on Sunday gives a good preview of just what he said and where he's at with things. And then Herbert Scroggins is a guy who has official visits scheduled with Tennessee, Miami, Auburn, and Georgia Tech. And then he has a bunch of other offers. Alabama offered him last month, a couple other schools. I mean, those are the 5 he's focused on, though, is North Carolina, Georgia Tech, Auburn, Tennessee, and who's the other one? Anyway, there's 5 that he's mostly focused on.
But you got Tennessee, Georgia Tech, Miami.
Miami's the one I missed.
Yep.
Okay.
So let me ask you, while you're talking about Scroggins, Benedictine Military School. Tell me about that school. And I always ask the level of competition and all that good stuff.
Yeah, I don't know a whole lot about it. And now I know that it's in Savannah, and I imagine this Savannah is not like relative to the rest of Georgia. And keep in mind, the greater Atlanta area is probably one of the best, if not the best area in the nation when it comes to producing recruits and the level of competition in high school football. That Atlanta area is just unreal. Savannah is a significant drop from that, but I don't know a whole lot about it just because it's not an area that North Carolina consistently recruits. So I haven't done a whole lot of digging, but the field for him is pretty impressive, which is what kind of gave me a little pause on just North Carolina's chances kind of heading into the weekend. But I'm going to be honest, I think North Carolina now has a better chance for Scroggins than they do for the other 2, coming out of the weekend, just because some of the things I've learned about him as far as, and some of this stuff is in the story we posted today on him, but how important education is for him is pretty key. And not to disparage any other school, but if you look at North Carolina's academic reputation compared to most of the other schools in there, I'll let you kind of finish that sentence.
No, you're not setting me up, buddy. Look, I scraped by in college, and granted it was at Carolina, but I'm not going to promote any institution of higher learning.
I think if we were going to, all right, how about this? If we were going to rank the 5 schools we mentioned that he's considering, North Carolina would definitely be up there as far if we're just basing it on academics.
There you go. Eric Miller in the chat. He finished your quote for you.
Okay. I don't know if I want to go that far.
But. You either are or you are not. There is no is or there is no try.
Yeah. So anyway, so I was actually surprised by I think North Carolina is in a good spot for him. And I actually, to be honest, and you never know. I mean, you never know what these kids going through, these kids' minds and all this. I was a tad bit concerned by Christian Evans. The fact that he's still going to take his official visits. I mean, he said all the right things, but I think that was an opportunity for North Carolina to shut the door. But I guess I shouldn't say concerned. Because he could definitely take the rest of his official visits and still choose North Carolina. And North Carolina is probably, outside of a commitment, is in the most ideal spot that they would want to be in at this point.
If you were a high school recruit, why would you not take them all? Especially now that you can take as many as you want, right? Schools have to rely on the 56 or whatever it is, but players themselves can take them all over. I'm going everywhere, man. And now let me ask you this.
Sure.
Because, I mean, everybody says that, and who knows what you do. If you take official, we talked about committable offers in the past, and you see these guys, you mentioned Scroggins list, and you mentioned Evans or whatever. If they have official visits scheduled, and they in fact go on those official visits to whatever school, it's safe to say that said school wants them, correct?
Yeah, I think so. I think generally speaking, yeah.
Because you get people that say, oh, they get all these offers, they're not committable or whatever. But if you're on their official visit list, when schools only have 56 to offer, so Scroggins, 3-star guy, high 3-star guy, however you want to put it, decently impressive official visit list. So that would be a good pickup for North Carolina.
Well, I could tie your two thoughts together. Is that your initial thought about why wouldn't you take all your official visits, and then the committability of offers, and that's where things kind of get a little dicey, because schools can say, hey, look, you have a spot here, but we have another guy at your position officially visiting next weekend, and if he commits, your spot's gone.
Right.
And so, or they might, I mean, I've heard of a lot of schools saying, hey, if you leave here without committing, we're done. So there is that squeezing, as they call it, that definitely occurs, which makes it difficult. Now, there are guys who obviously have it's all about leverage. Who has leverage in these situations? And then sometimes it's there are definitely coaches, and I believe Mac Brown kind of takes this approach, and I've read about Dabo Sweeney doing the same thing, is in that they want these kids to take all of their visits and be sure of their decision, because if you force them to make a decision and then a couple of months later they start to I don't know, you're already invested in this kid. You already have told everybody else, no, we're full and all this sort of stuff. And then this kid wants to take official visits. Then you can be left in a situation where you're trying to, you lose that kid because he was forced into the decision and he wants to take visits. And now you're in a scramble to try to fill that spot on your class. But yet the pool of options are significantly more shallow than what they are now.
Yeah. I don't think any of that matters anymore with the transfer portal. That certainly alleviates maybe the concern. But when you look at that, how does one get leverage? 5-star guys obviously have leverage.
Yeah, I think
does it quarterbacks maybe have leverage, or do they?
They can, and there are situations where they, I think it's a supply and demand situation. If a school, if a kid has a bunch of schools that really like them, there's some, there's obviously leverage there.
I like Mac Brown's quote, right? You date, I date.
Yeah.
It kind of applies here.
We should give shout out to Sean for showing up. Appreciate it. I know the change in day might affect people's schedules.
Yeah.
But North Carolina camp tomorrow, so we wouldn't been able to do it really.
Better late than never. That's what we say. Sy or SY has a question for you, Don. More of a top 5 maybe for later, but I like this question. Can you do that on the fly? Can you handle top 5 reasons in order that players pick a specific school? If you're listening
on the fly,
to this,
my order is going to be a little shaky, but I think number 1 is location. And what I mean by that is that there's a reason why North Carolina does not recruit California, or really truly doesn't. I mean, I guess they do kind of recruit Texas and all that, but there's a reason why certain schools don't recruit North Carolina, and location is a big factor. And then obviously it becomes less of a factor when it's not that big of a distance. The other thing is just comfort, and there's a lot of things that go into comfort, in that the coaching staff, how frequently you visit the school, location, I think factors into comfort and all that. Is there a lot of people from your area, from your school that go to that school, that sort of thing? And I think, we try to label, we try to coin a phrase, prestige, you know what I mean? Perception. What's the school's perception? Which obviously on-field results impact perception, but they may not. We always bring up Miami, who, when's the last time Miami has truly been a threat on the football field? It's been a while, right?
Yeah,
but
100%.
Yet, when Miami offers a kid a kid definitely looks at that, and it's definitely, oh wow, Miami offered me. They don't get the same, when UCF offers, it's not the same sort of response as when Miami offers a kid. So the prestige, the perception of Miami is obviously a lot stronger than what their on-field stuff has been. But obviously, Georgia offers, but they've won national championships recently, so clearly on-field results matter a lot. And just what that school. My best example is, like, for schools in this area, this region, ask a high school kid in Arizona, what their thoughts are. And keep in mind, kids don't watch college football, spend all day watching college football like we do. So they might not know, what North Carolina did, last season, or who won the ACC and all that sort of stuff. So I think those are the main things. NIL is a factor, but if you read, and I try to read everything, and I also obviously try to talk to, NIL is not number one. It's not. If you read any of these anonymous recruit stories, or read all the stuff that came out of I probably shouldn't give a shout out to On3 or Competition, but they did that symposium with the top guys, and Bryce Baker even said NIL wasn't really a factor. A lot of these kids say NIL wasn't a factor. If you read all this, The Athletic did this anonymous story with recruits so they could speak freely and just talk about NIL and just how much of an impact it was. And they downplayed it. They said, they wanted to feel comfortable someplace. Now, if you have two places where you feel very comfortable and one's promising you this and one's promising you that, then that could tip the scales, Now, We're talking generally. Is there a kid, a family who is just purely going out there trying to get a big payday? Absolutely. But I think the vast majority of kids are still making decisions based off of what most people make decisions off of, comfort, what's best for their future, and what kind of works for their family.
It's an interesting dynamic, right? Everybody, to your point about NIL, everybody thinks it's all about that now, 100%. And it's, luckily for the game and for the kids in the schools, it's not all about that in actuality. It's a factor. I think it becomes more of a factor on the transfer side, honestly.
I agree.
And
I think it's a much bigger, and I think it's so hard because the numbers, we don't really have access to the numbers. But from what I've gathered, schools are willing to, quote unquote, pay up way more for transfer portal kids because there's a little bit more proof in the pudding of how good they can be, what sort of impact they can make. Whereas high school kids, we've seen, even though rankings are really good tellers of just how good a prospect could be, it's still kind of a coin flip. The boom and bust. There's still a lot of factors that can make a kid bust. And so schools understand that, NIL and collectives understand that. So there's not as much bidding war. There's definitely some when we were talking about the top 100 guys, but the portal is where a lot of the stuff is. The other thing, just to kind of go back to my other point, is with that Rashada situation, who clearly he took the money at Florida and ran from Miami, who was also planning on giving him a lot of money. Well, I think that woke up a lot of recruits to understand that what this school and what that collective is promising you might not be real, and so now they're going, he's suing them to try to get some of that money, but it's a tough business.
Is a follow-up on that, is putting players in the NFL important?
I think that goes into the prestige stuff. You know what I mean? Because if
Right.
you look at it, like we can look at different factors, schools that put certain guys in, in the draft and all that. And I don't know, like, I mean, there's certain schools that have a reputation for certain positions, and that helps them for sure. But there was that one year, and I hate to bring up this example because no one's going to like it, but remember the year that NC State had all those defensive linemen going to the draft.
Yeah.
And
people saw that.
They didn't really benefit from that. Nobody considers them this great defensive line hub at all. You know what I mean?
Uh-huh.
And there wasn't like this huge influx, and they didn't just have a bunch of great classes afterwards because NC State's perception is his perception, and it's kind of hard to alter perceptions.
Yeah. I mean, State got a bunch of D lineman recruits in that transition between Fedora and Mac Brown, but I'm not sure many of them did a lot.
Well, some of them it was because Fedora was kind of falling, and people knew that. I mean, that 2019 class wasn't very good. So Billy Collins brings up education. Education is definitely a factor. But if we're being honest, okay, and I if you want a good education, but your goal is to make it to NFL, like take Drake May. All right. I mean, if we're being real, Alabama has a better reputation of putting guys into the NFL than North Carolina, right? But he chose North Carolina, and clearly going into the NFL was a big goal of his. But I mean, the reality is that the education did, and the connection. So he's probably not the best example to use. The connection probably played the biggest role in all of this. But that goes back to my initial was the comfort. I mean, he clearly felt more comfortable at North Carolina than anybody anywhere else. I mean, because he's been there a gazillion times. So, but I mean, all of these things are factors. Education is a factor. A guy like Herbert, which I brought up, clearly, I believe education is going to be a bigger deal for him than for some other kids. And there's some kids, education is super important. And there's some kids who feel like I can get a quality education just about anywhere.
Yeah, I mean, I guess a college degree is a college degree if that's how you take it. But it's a fascinating
That's
discussion.
A whole different crazy conversation too, though.
Yeah, I mean, so you've got a lot of factors that go into these decisions, but the bottom line is a lot of these decisions are being made or wanting to be made, or hopefully from the school's perspective are being made here in the month of June. And we're talking with Don Callahan on the Noon Dish about all this official visit weekend. I'm going to take a second to talk about Johnny T-shirt. Am I okay to do this? Am I okay to go?
For it. Are we done talking? Do you have any more questions about this past weekend?
Well, let me ask you one question off of that before I talk Johnny T. Ancrum. What's the difference? And I believe I asked one of the past three guests, but I can't remember. He's committed. His official visit plan, itinerary / what are they doing versus an uncommitted guy? Is it pretty much the same?
The itinerary is the same for the most part. Like, obviously, I'm sure he's going to want to see whatever his desired major is. He's going to want to see that. I don't know what his is. Maybe his is business. Somebody else's wants to go into broadcast journalism. So obviously they'll look at different things when it comes to that sort of stuff. These guys do a lot of the same things together, a lot of eating together. And we'll get into this a little bit more when we talk about this upcoming weekend. But a lot of eating together, like a lot of hanging out together. So there's a lot of the same things. But what you kind of notice sometimes is like, who is kind of making sure that they're getting attention. Like Scroggins had Molly Jacoby, who was by his side the entire time. Whereas, I think Ancrum had one of just kind of the regular staffers. You know what I mean? Like Molly Jacoby's pretty high on the totem pole. So anyway, you hate to kind of say there's a I don't know, there's a difference, I guess,
Right.
but they obviously know they don't have to sell him. They just have to kind of keep him, there and make sure you still want to take care of him. You still want him to see the things. You still want him to feel comfortable. You still want him to feel loved and all that sort of stuff. So that's still important. But I mean, I think there has to be a little bit different of an approach for a guy who's committed compared to a guy who you're battling SEC schools for.
Yeah, so some more of a welcome home, Tommy, versus this could be your new home, Tommy approach.
Yeah.
Same great home, right?
Yeah. But you might, if you're, Mac Brown, I don't know if this happened, but it wouldn't surprise me if Mac Brown met with Ancrum on Saturday and just kind of talked to him real quickly on Sunday before he left. But now Scroggins was the last one to leave. And from my understanding, he left significantly later than everybody else because I think he took his own transportation. So they didn't have to worry about the airport and all that sort of stuff with him. But also, I imagine Mac wanted to make sure that he spent a good amount of time with him.
Right.
It wouldn't surprise me if they talked for like, I don't know, a couple hours, where with Ancrum, he probably met with Mac for 30 minutes. And it sounds bad because it sounds like Ancrum is no longer like important, but of course he is. If he were to decommit, North Carolina would be scrambling, trying to find somebody to fit his spot. But it's just, you got to work a little differently for those guys who are uncommitted, especially those guys who are, the competition is pretty steep.
So let me ask you a question. If I'm on an official visit, I'm 6'3.5", 6'4", 225, 230. Tommy Ashley from Johnston County, class of 1989. We'll say Triple S High School. Who's hanging out with me if I'm at Carolina with the skill set I have?
I mean, are you what rating? What star recruit are you?
I don't know, man. I'm unknown. I'm one of those diamonds in the rough, but they can tell it's physically imposing and nasty and mean. What do you think?
Yeah, I guess.
I think one of the ushers at the ball game, they'll call over there.
Yeah, something like that.
One of the ticket takers. Don, I put you on the spot. You can't come through with a funny. That's all right. We're going to talk about Johnny T-Shirt, JohnnyT-Shirt.com, specialist in recruiting the greatest gear. They've got it all at Johnny T-Shirt on Franklin Street or online. If you're an Inside Carolina Premium member, first of all, you get Don Callahan, but you also get 10% off of all of Johnny T-Shirt's gear, and it's worth it. It's quite frankly worth it. It's worth it for the customer service. It's worth it for the gear. It's worth it for the information. Shop local. Stay with Johnny T-Shirt. Also, shout out to Congruity. Their logo's on the screen here, congruityhr.com/Tar Heels to get your small to mid-sized business assessment. They're a local business. This is one thing I like about Inside Carolina's setup. We're supporting local businesses and imploring you to support local businesses. Johnny T-Shirt's one of them. Congruity's another. Now, Congruity's done a ton to be a national brand, and that's because they know what they're doing. And they have the customer service. They have the technology. They have all the means and ways to get your business through the roof like they've been able to do themselves. Go to that website, congruityhr.com/Tar Heels. Get it done. National guys will pay the bills. On the audio version, you're listening to the Noon Dish. All right, Don, we talked about the official visits. This is the official visit report. Officially the official visit report. And there's a big weekend coming up. And I asked the question about committed versus non-committed and all that. It's going to be a mixture this coming weekend at North Carolina. I'll let you reveal how many and who all you want to reveal here. But safe to say that this weekend, I guess, what is it, June 7th, 6th and 7th, 6th, 7th, and 8th, is a huge weekend for North Carolina football.
Yeah, this is kind of a change in what North Carolina has done that the past few, I guess, cycles, where they try to use that last weekend as the official visit weekend when they're trying to bring in their top guys. Well, this is not to diminish their interest in anyone else that's officially visiting any other weekend, because obviously there's a lot of other factors that contribute to when someone officially visits North Carolina. But this is the weekend that they targeted for to be their big weekend in hopes to land their guys. A lot of commits as of today, and it's Tuesday, which is very early in the week to kind of, put anything into stone. As we saw last week, as I mentioned, Jasper Parker, we reported that he was added to the weekend on Thursday. So we still have a couple days before things like that can happen. But anyway, so I have 10 recruits officially visiting North Carolina this weekend. And I believe, 6 of them are commits. That's Austin Alexander, Bryce Baker, Trey Blue, Anthony Cruwell, Alex Payne, and Marshall Pritchard, and then 4 uncommitted guys. That's 4-star wide receiver Micah Clark, another wide receiver in Evan Haynes, Onis Konabani, a 4-star cornerback, and then also I believe he's a top 100 kid in London Merritt, who's actually committed to Ohio State, is scheduled to officially visit North Carolina this weekend. Again, subject to change. Could Ohio State, for example, come in and say, London can't visit North Carolina, or we are pulling the scholarship? Absolutely. I don't think that's going to happen. Or maybe London says, hey, look, I don't want to, I'm good with Ohio State. But anyway, or somebody add it at the last moment. Absolutely could be the case. So if you notice a couple things here, in that Malik Clark is one of North Carolina's, if not North Carolina's, top wide receiver target. And do you see who else is officially visiting North Carolina this weekend?
The guy that would be throwing him the ball.
Bryce Baker. That's not a coincidence. That's by design. Also notice that Marshall Pritchard is officially visiting North Carolina this weekend. Now, Tommy, I know you don't follow recruiting super closely. Do you know the connection between Marshall Pritchard and another big-time guy visiting this weekend?
Put me on the spot. And I feel like I know it, but I don't want to embarrass myself. I'd rather keep my mouth closed.
Onis Konabani, former teammates, very close friends with Marshall Pritchard. The other thing, and this is not like, this is just how it would be any weekend, don't be surprised if Jordan Shipp is Onis's player host for the weekend. Very close to Jordan, has mentioned multiple times how he has gone up on visits to North Carolina to support Jordan. So it would actually surprise me if Jordan wasn't his player host. But having Marshall there obviously also kind of helps. And this goes back to what we were talking about before, is why itineraries you want to kind of match up to a degree, because when they go and hang out and everything, you want Onis, sitting at the table eating lunch with Marshall Pritchard as much as possible. You want Onis hanging out in the players' lounge with Marshall and Jordan Shipp as much as possible. You want Malik Clark hanging out with both, with Bryce Baker, and you want Evan Haynes hanging out with Bryce Baker. So that's where just the logic and the strategy involved. The chess match that kind of happens with these official visits kind of comes into play for North Carolina.
And it goes back to what we talked about earlier in the show, the comfort level.
Yeah.
Because it's like, you go somewhere and you don't know anybody, you might have a nice time, but it's still different than if you go somewhere and you got a lot of buddies.
Yes,
it's always fun in crowds or in groups.
Yes.
And like we talked about with Alex White, Pat, even some with Mars, is that everything, there's a reason for everything.
Yeah.
That is done, and what you just explained there is important. How important is it to have, and we talked about this before, but I'll let you reiterate it for people, to have a big-time quarterback recruit being that guy for North Carolina in Bryce Baker? And we've seen, articles come out, and you mentioned the NIL stuff that he talked about and all, but how important it is for North Carolina, for Mack Brown, for the recruiting staff to have Bryce Baker as their sort of front and center guy.
Yeah, it's one of those things that we talked about a bunch of different things where we got questions about NFL success, education, all this other stuff that I kind of downplayed a little bit, but it's important. It's a piece. It is like a percentage that helps his school. And I think that a guy like Bryce Baker helps North Carolina with guys like Malik Clark and Evan Hayes, and eventually, Michael Matthews officially visiting next weekend, and I believe Snook Peterkin's visiting next weekend also. But having Bryce Baker as your quarterback makes a huge difference for these guys, or makes a difference. Now, no one's choosing a school because Bryce Baker is there, but it makes it easier to go to a school knowing, hey, I got this guy who's a legit dude coming to or already there at that school. So I'm comfortable knowing I have somebody who can get me the ball. I mean, receivers know, These receivers have played 7-on-7, have been on high school teams where they didn't have a quarterback, and they know the difference in how they play and the success that their teams have when they do have a quarterback. So it's definitely helps North Carolina for sure.
Anything left on this bone here? You listed off pretty much everybody's. And folks, and I want to say it again, you said it, Don, stuff changes. Sherelle McMillan on the basketball side has talked about, gotten to where we even have to post updates on the site with the caveat that this could literally change at any moment. And to your point about official visits, it's Tuesday. We're recording this, 12:44 Eastern time Tuesday, which is a long ways before Friday. So things could change. But do you feel like it's run smooth in the process for them so far in this recruiting cycle? Is that a fair question?
Yeah, I was I don't know what the word I want to use. I guess impressed just with the success of this past weekend from North Carolina, the feedback that I got from recruits. And yes, every time someone visits a campus, I've never had a kid visit a school, whether it's North Carolina or anywhere else, and tell me, man, that school sucks. I've never had that. But there is a difference in what you're saying. If you're just saying, enjoy the people, enjoy the campus is beautiful, all that's, the generic sort of you could say about any school. Or if you're being very personalized and individualized with what you're saying about a school, what stood out to you? One of the things with Herbert is just what he was saying about his player host and just how he connected with his player host. That's all in the story we ran today, so I won't go into details about it. So check that out. But those sort of things I think resonates and sticks with you. And when it comes to decision time, it's in the back of your head. Again, it's not something that's going to make the decision for you, but it certainly kind of just piles on the advantages that North Carolina has for that kid. But one other thing before we get to something else, Onis Konabani. And I think some of the UNC posters and people on Twitter are starting to kind of realize he loves the attention. He's a great kid. Great. I would, if we could rely on, or if we could reliably get him on as a guest, he would be absolutely tremendous. Great personality, huge character, always smiling, has a great backstory. But he loves posting on Twitter. If you follow him over the weekend, all right, let's just take a step back. A couple weeks ago, came out, visited Tennessee, and named Tennessee his leader. Then this past weekend, was tweeting like crazy when he was at Florida State. He had a FaceTime with Jalen Ramsey, played Florida State and all this, and that made everybody go crazy on Twitter and different things he said about Florida State, and everyone now thinks Florida State's the team to beat, and they may be. I don't know, but there is a very good chance he goes to North Carolina this weekend and tweets the entire time and makes you think North Carolina's a school to beat, and they may be, but take it with a grain of salt. Okay, be very careful. There are people who bought into what last class with oh man, now I'm going blank. The running back from Cummings High School who ended up at NC State. Somebody help me in the chat. I'm going blank on his name. But him, and then the receiver from South Carolina that ended up in Tennessee. These guys were posting a lot of positive things about North Carolina. There's a bunch of other guys who do the same thing. And some posters, I was trying to explain to them, hey, North Carolina's behind in this recruitment. And they're like, no, can't be. Didn't you see what he was saying on Twitter? They wouldn't post that if North Carolina was behind. And I'm like, no, trust me, North Carolina's behind. Well, Onis, I think North Carolina has a shot with him for sure. We might not actually truly know where he's going to go until he actually decides. But don't be surprised if he just pumps up North Carolina all weekend long.
Yeah, it's Jonathan Paylor is who you're talking about.
Jonathan Paylor, yes.
How do you like that? I had to correct the recruiting expert or help the recruiting expert out.
It's like those Uber Eats commercials. In order for me to remember something, I got to push something out. So people always ask me, how do I remember all these names? And I don't. I'm terrible with names. But in order for me to remember all these 2025 names and starting to remember these 2026 names, well, I had to push out all the 2024 and 2023 names. And
Get them
Paler
out of the
wasn't.
banks.
Yeah,
There's only so many spaces in here.
that's right. And maybe I might have less than others.
Top 5. Where we going?
Top 5 recruits. Did anyone really?
Only one person.
Oh, come on. We got to get other people.
See,
Preston.
these top 5s are boring, man. I didn't want to hurt your feelings, but they're boring. We got to go something else.
All right.
Preston. I'm going to throw Preston up.
Yeah, throw Preston's up, and then Baker.
He's got Dusty Baker, Chase Young, Darrell Evans. I'm joking. Read them out, Don.
All right.
Do you know who Dusty Baker is?
I do. He's a manager, or was a manager.
Do you know who Steve Young is?
Steve Young?
Uh-huh.
I'm not that much younger than you.
Do you know who Darrell Evans was?
I don't.
Did he play for the Tigers?
Okay.
Detroit Tigers. Anyway, Scroggins is
So I'm
sounds like the Justified dude, Bo Coggins.
Since Preston is the only one that submitted it, right? All right.
Yeah.
So we'll give him some extra love. I'm assuming he's talking about Bryce Baker here, and I don't think there's any. I mean, North Carolina should come out of the month with him. So I don't think there's any concern. But yes, I mean, obviously holding on to him is pretty important. And I just with Jordan Young. God, Tommy, why'd you take that down? I was looking at that. With Jordan Young, I wouldn't be surprised if he doesn't officially visit North Carolina. So that might be a bit of a pipe dream. He's probably, of the quote-unquote outstanding offers North Carolina has out there, he's probably the only one who doesn't have an official visit scheduled. And I really wouldn't be surprised if he doesn't take an official. And Christian Evans, he said some very, very, very positive things about North Carolina. But obviously we're going to have to wait to see what happens with his official visits. Scroggins, as I said, very positive. I changed my thoughts completely on just the trajectory of his recruitment. And the fast receiver from South Carolina, I'm assuming that would have to be Malik Clark. He's actually my number one, because I think, even though, and I was kind of debating this, I was talking to a source actually about North Carolina's current wide receiver room. And this source was like, this room is stacked. Because I was basically bringing up the fact that, hey, Jordan Shipp, is he going to be able to play? You guys don't typically play true freshman receivers. And this person said, yeah, I think so. He is a stud. But they said, that receiver room is just absolutely just loaded. Mentioned Chris Culliver. And so with that being said, I feel like North Carolina, the past few classes, has done a great job of landing really good wide receivers. And so, throwing another one in there, I mean, you never want to turn away, but is that going to be the number one need? That was my number one, was Malik Clark, because I'm a huge fan of his as a player. His film is just unbelievable. So he was my number one. Running back is on my list also, just because there's no clear-cut path on how this kind of unfolds. You have Jasper Parker, who doesn't really show his cards too much and has a few official visits left. You have Bo Walker, who's committed to Georgia, but Georgia has since he committed, Georgia has changed running back coaches and appears to like some uncommitted guys better. And in a lot of those situations, Georgia's in position to land those kids. So this could be another Zion Ferguson situation for North Carolina, to where an SEC school doesn't really want a kid anymore, and UNC is kind of the benefactor of that. And then there's Jabri Coleman, who's supposed to make a mid-week official visit to North Carolina later on this month. He's a little bit, I think he'll be a little bit harder for North Carolina to pull, especially if Penn State starts losing some of these running back commits that they have. But yeah, so running back, I think getting at least one of them is important for North Carolina. I threw Onus on there. It's not like a must have, but I mean, if North Carolina can pull him, I think that'd be huge. I think he'd be a great kid, great locker room kid, as I was alluding to earlier. A kid who I think has a lot of potential. He's not, if you just remember that he's only really played American football the past couple of years, but super athletic kid. So I think he would be a great get for North Carolina. And then beyond that, I mean, I guess, Scroggins, Christian Evans. I mean, obviously you want to get those D linemen when you can.
My favorite name on your whole list, and there's some classic names, but Bo Walker as a running
Okay.
back.
Okay.
I mean, Bo Jackson Herschel Walker, man, he's going to be
Well,
unbelievable.
I believe one of the guys North Carolina is recruiting. I got to go double check. I believe his name is there is a Bo. Is there Bo Jackson? I believe there's a Bo Jackson in this class that George is recruiting. But
That's
he lives in Ohio State. Or lives in Ohio. But anyway,
so. Has the
I
footprint really changed? I noticed we talked about one of the officials this past weekend was a Virginia guy, Evans. Has the footprint for Carolina changed? Not officially, but just like we've talked a lot about Georgia.
mhm.
Is that like a thing?
Well, George has always been a really a state North Carolina has hit really hard. I mean, really, I feel like Fedora made it a huge priority. I mean, it was always a state that North Carolina recruited, but Fedora made it a huge priority, and Mac Brown has kind of continued that. I think some of it is just that it's always produced recruits, but it reached a whole new level during Fedora's tenure. And then prior to Fedora was Butch Davis, who took a little bit more of a national sort of approach to recruiting, even though they had like actual like a footprint. Is there any other areas that besides Georgia that interest you?
I mean, you go where the talent is, right? And we talked about one of the interesting discussions we had. It's been a while. We talked about comparing maybe the 20th ranked Georgia player versus the 10th ranked North Carolina person. You remember that discussion we had? And it's like, well, if I'm 30 in Georgia, I might be top 10 in North Carolina. So obviously, the big schools can't take them all in Georgia, and there's a ton of talent. But let me ask you, you just brought up something, and I want to ask you this question before we get out of here. National recruits. And North Carolina's never really been a huge national recruit school, like you mentioned, but has the transfer portal really changed that? Like, I know you don't follow a bunch of other schools, but like, kid from California commits to an East Coast team, then he can leave if he doesn't like it. You know what I mean? Has that
Yeah.
changed guys like maybe going somewhere they wouldn't have gone to 5 years ago,
I
10
don't.
years ago?
So before I get to your question, there is a Bo Jackson. His name is Bo Jackson, but he lives in Ohio. Georgia is recruiting him. He is the number well, depending on what ranking. The composite. Is it the composite? The composite. He's the number 3 running back in the nation, in Ohio. Anyway, see, I don't think anybody goes because if like you had maybe your sons aren't a great example, but when they made their college decision, they had no restrictions. Like they could go someplace and they chose North Carolina, but they could go someplace and easily transfer somewhere else. Like I don't,
Yeah.
and I mean, I had the same sort of option. You had the same sort of option. I don't think anybody makes a decision and says, I'm going to choose this because if it doesn't work out, I can go somewhere else. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
I just
It's
don't think,
interesting.
I don't think that's the case. I think it's, I think if anything, coaches are realizing, hey, we need to, because I mean, we've always talked about when a kid commits somewhere else. I think they're well, for a while there, it was you kind of keep the line of communication open just in case they kind of fell off or whatever. But I think coaches kind of moved away from that, you know. But now it's important to keep that line of communication throughout their recruitment. And obviously, when you're not allowed to talk to them, like if they're committed to another school, sign with another school, not allowed to talk to them, don't talk to them. But it's important to maintain that relationship or have that relationship or make sure it doesn't end in a bad way because you might be recruiting that kid again in 2 years. So like when
Yeah,
a kid, if you get in a situation where, and there have been situations where you pour everything into recruiting a kid and you choose your rival, and then there's this big fight. We've heard stories, this big argument or the coach didn't take it too well. I don't think you want to do that anymore because you are in a huge advantage if that kid ends up turning out to be a good player and enters the portal and is looking for somewhere else. Because as we've looked at what North Carolina has, in a lot of situations, has really leaned on relationships and information that they've had previously when recruiting the portal.
Yeah. It's amazing how you don't burn the bridge you might walk over later. You like that quote, don't you?
I do. I love it, Tommy.
Defensive tackle that's going to be playing this year a lot.
Yeah.
That might apply to that.
Yeah.
Anything left on Callahan? We're going to get out of here under an hour. We're at 55 and a half minutes. I'll let you close us down, just sort of highlight. We're going to try to do this next Tuesday and then the Tuesday after. So if you're watching live, and shout out to the folks that have joined us next Tuesday at noon, and we should be around doing it for the next couple 3 weeks here during camp season. Anything left, Donnie?
No, that was the only thing I was going to hit on, is just to remind people that just for at least the next few weeks, we're doing it on Tuesday, and so adjust your schedules if you can.
Yeah, join us on Tuesdays. If you're listening to this later, we recorded it on Tuesday at noon. It might have changed by the time you hear this. Somebody we talked about may have committed elsewhere, may have committed to Carolina. Keep that in mind when you listen to it. But as always, we appreciate the live chat crowd. We appreciate everybody that takes us in later. We appreciate Johnny T-shirt and Congruity, and I always appreciate Don Callahan.
I always appreciate
even though he is he's grayed out in three. Folks, when you're old and you have children, this is what happens. Your hair goes from black to white.
Tommy just avoided it altogether and just shaved.
I just shaved it off 100%. You see what this is? It is it would look just like that. I wish I could grow a big old white afro, though. That would be awesome.
That would
Don, I appreciate it as always, and shout out to everybody that's been in the chat. You guys stay safe.
Sean, Preston, thank you for always coming in here.
Yeah. Make sure turn the lights off when you leave. Always welcome. See you, Don.
See ya.